Yes, it worked in the demo. Okay, welcome to the 23rd Chaos Communication Congress. Oh yes, it's this time again. So, my name is Pritlove. Hello. I just want to introduce you to, the usual stuff, some organizational things, some thoughts. Yeah. And then I will hand over to John Perry Barlow. Let me explain some things here. I'm going to explain some of the new features here at the Congress and some old features as well. The services you can expect here at the event. Some projects as well, and there's a very special project I'm going to go into a bit more detail. And I talk about a bit, losing wars, gaining trust, these things. And then of course we get to the keynote. So, of course there are conferences and workshops. We have a new timetable layout. I'm going to explain this a bit later. As usual, we have the lightning talks, and down in the Art and Beauty, in the center place, you find all kinds of hands-on hacking projects, as usual, the lockpicking, the Lego, the robotics, and so on. We have redesigned the Hack Center area this time. There are usual tables right now, and we put everything in the central space. You might have already seen it. And there's also a new idea, the Hack Center Lounge, right in the last room. You will easily find it. Just follow the music. We will see how this will work out. So, our services, as usual, there is the info desk. At the info desk you get all kinds of information. So if you have a question, you know it, you'll first go there. And also, there is the DEC telephone network. If you haven't bought your telephone yet, there are options over there. It's a tone, very cheap to buy. And as usual, we heard that they're going to return it easily if you're not satisfied with the telephone for some reason after a couple of days. Also, nothing new, the Congress TV, that's the information, TVs that are standing around that show the upcoming events everywhere. We also have a very special new kind of streaming using DVB-T. So if you have one of these nifty DVB-T receivers on your laptop, this might already probably work. I haven't checked it myself. And there's IP streaming as well. You find all the information on the wiki, on the public website. Of course, there's a wireless and a wired network, which should be up and running. I was told we have an outbound link of around 5 gigabits. Last year, we didn't really fill it. So, make sure the bandwidth gets used this time. I know you know. You know how to do this. And if you don't know how to do this, go to the NOC help desk. There's one here, over there, and there's one in the Hack Center as well, and you can ask them how to do this. And in case you are already, acquainted with the usual stuff, you might make use of our Hacker Ethics hotline, which has been very popular last year. Due to its popularity, we're going to repeat this project again. So, when in doubt, and you're standing in front of some kind of huge gate that looks interesting, with all kind of bells and whistles, before you enter, call the hotline and ask what would be the best next step to take before running into problems. So, okay, I admit, there's nothing much new here. The conference layout has slightly changed, so we have took out one lecture. So it's now 3 blocks of 3 lectures each, and each lecture is 1 hour long now. So we have extended the time for the speakers, and we have also added a 15-minute break afterwards. So the result are these odd starting times, But the good thing is you have enough time to change rooms and everything. That's our way to improve the conference program. So this means there are 2 big breaks at 3:30 and 7:30 for an hour that you can use to chill out. And actually we pushed this a bit forward to make sure that everybody can still buy his deck phone later on. But the good thing is Berlin changed some laws recently, so some of the shops here at Alexanderplatz close at 10 o'clock now. That might be interesting to you. So have a look at the conference program. It's on the web. There's a PDF version now as well. Let me point you to some specials that are coming up. There's the Konrad Zuse audiovisual feature. Is it today? I don't know. Tomorrow? Today. And there's going to be a PowerPoint karaoke. That's an idea we stole from another group who invented this, and we thought this was such a good idea we had to steal it. So if you are into, karaoke, you can have your talk at the Congress on a topic that's totally unknown to you right now. Of course, there will be the Hacker Jeopardy again, and there will be the second iteration of the Biometrics in Science Fiction show that's going to tell you all the reality in movies on biometrics. And there's a Capture the Flag hacking contest. I don't know when it's scheduled. You should ask the info desk, they know it. Some additional notes. There is, again, after 2 years, and you've already seen the first result, although it was stuttering, the Avid VJ conference is taking place at the same time. So we're sort of sharing the space as well. They are located at the Art and Beauty area. Very cool guys, and they're doing very interesting stuff. They're going to show all their showcases during the conference at Art and Beauty. It worked out pretty well last year, so we are going to continue this. There's no smoking inside the building, please. There are many opportunities to smoke outside and make new friends. I also have to mention that no sleeping inside the building is also a mandatory rule as well. So, and of course you have to switch on off your cell phones during lectures as well. This year there is our own video documentation team going around. They're over there, say hello. They're going to be everywhere and try to talk to you, ask you about the Congress. So I would be very happy if you could just openly support them whenever you can. If you don't want to participate, that's fine as well. But just know that they are here, and they are here for a reason, because we want to produce something about the Congress that we can share with you later on. Yes, and regarding the lectures, please make sure that you use the online feedback system. I know this is a bit well hidden in our website, but if you find a talk interesting that you've seen, go back to the website describing the talk and you find a link there, and this gives you the opportunity to provide some feedback for us. So, how did the talk went, all this stuff. This is very valuable for us in order to determine the program next year. And at the last day, as usual, there is the after-hour party at the sea base, which is around 1 kilometer from here, where you can all go when the Congress is finished in 4 days to come. So, that's the boring stuff. Projects. There's something new, and this conference is also about caring about certain issues, and one of them is surveillance. And we have been talking about surveillance for many years now. And only talking about it is a bit boring. So we decided to do our own do-it-yourself surveillance system. And you can already see it here. It's this little clip here. This nice little badge. It's even got a blinking LED. And and it's an active RFID tag. So, you know, one of these evil technologies. We built it inside this nice little box. And it's active, so it's got its own battery, which means you can switch it off. So it's nothing that always responds, it's something that you decide when you want to have it enabled and when not. And this little thingy we call it the Sputnik, because it's sending out signals, and it's part of a larger project we call the Chaos Positioning System, which is in place here at 23C3. So the whole building is covered with base stations that actively receive packets being sent by the Sputnik stuff. And all these messages of the tag are collected in a central server that is spit out to, well, whoever is interested in it. So when you ever always wanted to build your own surveillance system or do data mining on that stuff, if you always wanted to have, you know, real data to generate reports and generate analysis to really show what you can actually see when people are tracked, this might be the way to go. So if you're interested, talk to the team. The team is also down in the art and beauty area. And there's a very good visualization of the system as well in real-time 3D, which looks pretty nice from what I've seen so far. The good thing is this hardware is an open hardware design, and it's actually a small microcontroller on it. So the hardware is published under the Creative Commons license, and the software for it is published under the GPL software license. So you can just take this and build your own applications. You can get the design and build it your own. But if you don't really want to build it your own, you can just get it here at the Congress, because we have produced 1,000 of these thingies. So if you want to have one, be quick. This is going to be the platform for upcoming tracking projects at CCC events. So it's not just a small gimmick for this conference, it's something we try to build upon to build cool stuff. And the best news is probably it's just 10 euros, so we're not making any money on this. It's basically the production cost, and you can get it under the Infodesk run. Did I say it looks nice? So, I think you can imagine quite some interesting things. So if you want to get to the data, talk to the programmers that are sitting at Art and Beauty. Yeah! I always wanted to do this. You know, every three-letter organization has its secret agencies, and we are no exception, of course. You might already have heard about the CCC Intergalactic Contact Group. Yeah, it's a very clandestine group, you know, nobody really knows anything about it, including us. And new information came up recently, yeah, was, you know, transmitted over the wires. And the good news is the CCC Intergalactic Contact Group made contact with the Heart of Gold again. So we sort of came to some kind of preliminary agreement, which is, you know, totally unofficial, but I just wanted to share it with you. Or in other words, there's going to be camp next year. Oh yes, we finally found somebody who's willing to do it. And it's going to be a very new and very secret location, which I won't tell you, not right now. But I can tell you that's still pretty close to Berlin. So it's not going to be very far from here, just expected for 1.5 hour drive. And I can also share a date. It's not really official, but you know, that's what we're targeting at. And you can see we're sort of thinking about probably extending it to 5 days. This all depends on your feedback as well. So we want your ideas for the upcoming camp. share it with us, talk to the organization team. They're here. You just have to find them. You know, it's a clandestine agency, but real hackers make it. You know, ask the info desk and you will find them. Okay, so what's all this logo fuss about? You know, you've read the news, and again, nobody's getting it. So, who's that lady? Who's that lady? Oh, yes. And what's she doing with that apple? So, if there's still somebody left who doesn't know Eris, the goddess of chaos, of discord and confusion, now is your time to get acquainted. And the apple, the golden apple of discord, is the logo of this year's Congress, because we want to emphasize that we're doing a struggle here. We're trying to get into things, and we have to argue a lot, and that's what the Chaos Communication Congress has always been about. But the real question is, can we trust her? Who can we trust at all? You know, there's this ugly thing we're all afraid of, you know, reality. It's everywhere. And what is reality today? It means privacy is mostly gone. Yeah, we can talk for it endlessly. We know it. It's fading away. And it also means we are losing control of our data. We're approaching a time now where we depend on machines, we depend on programs, we depend on software, we depend on databases. So, while, you know, fighting the war and doing all that, we have sort of to adapt to reality, and we have to find our way. And I think it's all about trust. And that's why we put trust into the motto this year. What is trust? Thought about it? First of all, trust is something that really takes a very long time to establish. You have to work really hard to gain somebody's trust, or to be sure that you can trust somebody. And trust needs both openness on one hand and some kind of discretion as well. You know, the hacker ethics and that stuff, CCC always has extended these hacker ethics to, you know, use public data and protect private data, for instance. That's probably one way to gain trust, and that's a method that should be adopted by the public in general. But the best thing about trust is that trust is basically the absence of fear. If you can rely on trust, you don't have to work with fear, and we are seeing a lot of fear out there these days, scaring the shit out of people everywhere. And we have to make these people understand that working towards trust, in the end, creates security. That we can only create security in our society by creating trust, and we have to focus on trust. And we really need more of this stuff. So I'm very happy to announce that we have one John Perry Barlow of the EFF, of the Electric Frontier Foundation, mostly American-based organization until now, that's fighting its way, its war, to gain trust in the public and also to, you know, fight the stupidity that's out there, creating all the fuss about. So I want you to give a big hand to John Perry Barlow, who's going to speak to us right now.
I am certain is the most people I've ever seen who could write C code up before noon in my life. It's fantastic. You are to be complimented. I'm deeply honored that you would show up at such an hour and such numbers. I hope you can think at this hour. Trust. I come from a small town in Wyoming, which is a lot like many small towns in Germany, where you trust everybody, even the people you don't like and actually are afraid of. In fact, I find that the people I'm afraid of are more trustworthy than the people I'm not afraid of, because you can count on them usually to go on being somebody to be afraid of. But everybody knew everybody. There was no privacy, and there was absolutely assured identity. And when I started to ease out of the cattle business and into whatever it is that I do now, one of the things that fascinated me about the social impact of the internet, and this is back in '85, which seems like a recent time in some respects and incredibly quaint in others. One of the things that fascinated me was that nobody necessarily knew who anybody was in this environment. It was like we were all in there blind as cave fish, floating around in a sea of sparse asking, and having to take an awful lot for granted about who we were and what we were doing. And at first this was fine with me, because I didn't think much was right in it. And at that point, not much was. But pretty soon we found that we had social problems developing, early flame wars and that kind of thing, where trust would have been a very helpful thing to have. Then in 1989, first of all, let me back up a second. Just prior to that, I became aware of this organization, or some of the manifestations of this organization. I knew a guy named Cliff Stoll, who was investigating somebody who was affiliated with CCC. He wrote a book about it that was completely full of shit, I'm sure you know. But sold a lot of those books. I talked to him about this, and I thought it was interesting that he had this character, a set of characters that he was dealing with, but he didn't know whether he could trust or not. He didn't know what they were trying to do. He had no sense of their motivations. They were invisible. And yet, they were all over his network. And I started to think about trust in the digital age, trust without bodies, in fact, trust without self, in the usual sense of the term. Now, it turns out that if you start thinking about self in any deep way, you will find that it is not a simple question to answer. What is the self? The self is layers and layers and layers of culture and language and programming and neurosis and biology and drugs and God knows what all. It's a cloud of things, most of which are not things at all, but just forces and interrelationships that add up to being the self, and that self is almost always within a context that defines it. Now, when I was a cattle rancher in Sublette County, Wyoming, I had a self that was based on that. There's very little of myself at the moment that has anything whatsoever to do with what I might not know about how to deal with the various kinds of hoof ailments in Belgian workhorses, say, or how to deliver a calf in the middle of the night. But that was a big part of myself at one point. So self is contextual. And the context is not necessarily smart enough to understand how the self is relating within that context. Much of this didn't matter at first, except insofar as people were invisible and therefore capable of behaving badly in a way that they probably would never behave if they could see one another, knew one another, and had a sense of what the other selves involved were, or in fact who they were within that context. But I couldn't see that anybody was going to get too badly hurt. But in 1989, I became part of a forum for Harper's Magazine that was put on by a couple of prescient fellows named Jack Hitt and Paul Tuff, which were great names, since Jack wouldn't and Paul wasn't. But they realized that there were probably a bunch of issues that were about to arise around computer networks, security, privacy, freedom of expression. I mean, I really have to hand it to these guys. And they gathered a bunch of people together on a system called the Well in California. And we were all people who knew each other in meat space, actually. We were meeting, for the purposes of this forum, we were meeting in cyberspace, which had not yet been named. But we were meeting in meat space, too, and we knew each other, and we'd had eye contact, and we breathed the same air, and we had a sense of prana with one another. But then, parachuting into this conference are a couple of kids named Acid Freak and Fiber Optic. Now, and they don't spell it the way I would have thought they were supposed to be spelled. They spell it the way you would have. So, immediately these kids come into the conference and they are like, it's like the Western movie where the bad guys come to town. I mean, they're clanking around wearing all kinds of invisible digital hardware, and they're about 9 feet tall. And they're mean and they're nihilistic. They don't give a shit about anything, or so it would appear. And they create a persona. They create a self, each of them. And they're soon joined by another one called Scorpion, and they're all associated with something called the Legion of Doom. And none of this sounds particularly good to me. I mean, in fact, there are a number of old hippies in this conference, of which I must admit I was one, that had, a surprisingly adverse reaction, given the fact that, not that long before we'd been out to scare the horses just like these kids were. But their self was not evident to us. And they irritated us and we irritated them. And at one point I finally said, if somebody took away your modems and gave you skateboards, it wouldn't make a nickel's worth of difference. And this really irritated me because there was an element of truth to it. And so they proceeded to download my TRW file, my credit record, into the middle of the conference. Just like that. And told me that they were going to change that report so that I would never get credit again in my life. Well, now in America, if you don't have credit, you might as well just give it up. I mean, you spend the rest of your life in money order queues in the post office. And it's not and they scared me. I mean, I've been in police custody on acid, and I wasn't so frightened as I was of these desperados that I didn't have. And So I wrote one of them an email and I said, I think we've exceeded the bandwidth of this meeting. And I'd like to talk to you on the phone. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by giving you my phone number, which was listed, but he didn't know that. He didn't know that, and I knew that he was going to hack it out of the system sometime in the next 5 minutes just to show me that he could. And he did. So next thing I know, I'm talking to fiber optic. And fiber optic is a pencil neck geek kid whose voice hasn't even changed yet. He's about as dangerous as a duck. And he's just like I was when I was that sort of tentative age. I mean, all he wants to do is violate the forbidden. Actually wants to violate a forbidden that he doesn't have access to yet. And as soon as he got access to that, a lot of his digital spelunking went away. But he's somebody I can relate to. Suddenly he has a self that makes sense to me. And then I get to know Acid Freak, and then I get to know the other members of their group, and soon I'm like the scoutmaster to the Legion of Doom. And I'm having to acquire a whole new self for myself. In the middle of all this, the Secret Service lands on these kids. Rather harsh. Acid Freak comes home one day and finds that his 12-year-old sister's been held at gunpoint by large, stupid men in suits for about an hour and a half, while they removed every electronic item from the house that they could find, including clock radios. They'd taken all his Metallica tapes, lest those were covered with some kind of terrible material relating to espionage and stuff. And again, they didn't know who he was. There was no sense of what his self was. He didn't have a sense of what their self was. And under the circumstances, they didn't either. I mean, there's nothing quite like a well-armed, stupid guy in a suit who doesn't know what he's doing for not having a clearly definable self. At first, I just thought, well, I don't understand what's going on here. Maybe these kids are much worse than I think they are. If the Secret Service is going to be treating them with such maximum force, then maybe they're even worse than I thought. And I don't think they're very bad. They seem to have a very strong sense of ethics. I mean, I had acquired enough of a sense of their self as a community, as a collective, as a culture, that I could trust their ethical system not to do something that I would feel was wrong. I mean, if they were operating in an extra-legal terrain, they were literally out on what I consider to be the frontier. But then when the Secret Service starts coming, you think, God, this building is so weird. I keep thinking it's going to take off. Sorry. It's just sleep deprivation. It's some combination of acid and communism. Sleep deprivation probably is something. But, along around that time, I get a visit from the FBI myself, and clueless is a fairly kind word for describing the state of this fellow, Agent Richard Baxter, who visited my house. Thought that I might be involved in something called he kept calling the New Prosthesis League. Actually, its own name for itself was New Prometheus League, but never mind that. It had taken a little snippet of Apple's source code from the Macintosh ROMs and was shipping it around, leading the FBI to believe that it was the Macintosh recipe and that soon the Chinese would be producing Macintoshes. There were a lot of people believing a lot of squirrely stuff at this point. So I knew that this thing was going to take care of itself, and but I also knew that what there was going to be was a huge conflict between the systems that had obtained order previously, so those systems that had been devised, in large part, not far from here. I mean, much of the governance of the physical world these days is still being done according to the Prussian army model of hierarchical command. Didn't work that well for the Prussians in the final analysis. But never mind that. I knew that it wasn't going to work very well in this area where people didn't even have bodies or a self you could relate to, but I was confident that we could mediate this in some way. We set up the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Mitch Capor and John Gilmore, who's down here, and I, to kind of deal with the immediate legal issues that were involved in trying to ease the transition between what we considered to be the old way of obtaining order and the new way of obtaining order that would drive as the internet became an enormous social space that included everybody in the planet, which it will, and rapidly is. We had a lot of faith in sufficient form of self-development among the people who lived there, who did their business there, who were part of that environment, that we didn't worry too much about the fact that there probably was never going to be a way to impose law or to assure rights, except by the way in which the technological architecture of the net could I've never been to a technology conference where the technology one of these days I'm going to write a book about the cobbler's shoeless children and technology. Anyway, we were reasonably assured that it was a matter of time before ethics took the rule of law and assured freedom of expression and assured a trustworthy legal environment. I mean, not legal, but commercial environment. And what technology, what ethics couldn't provide, technology would. And the jury is out on that, but I mean, I'm running a little late on time. I was thinking I was going to have more time to discuss this, but I'm going to cut to the chase because I want to actually, to the extent possible, I want to have a discussion with some of you about this. One of my modest ambitions in life is to eliminate broadcast media. I say that because I know that broadcast media will eliminate themselves, and then I'll be able to take some of the credit. But, so I don't particularly want to be a broadcast medium, but let me tell you what I'm thinking at the moment, and this is what disturbs me. It was one thing when it was a relatively small group of people that had the skills that, say, the folks in this room possess. And they had a coherent culture, and they had a sense of self that was based on that culture. And they were living in an environment where kind of everybody knew where everybody stood, more or less. The world, oddly enough, in 1990 was a serene and sane place compared to its present sort of Katie bar the door lunacy. And I just trusted that it was going to continue. I mean, I'm very optimistic about things, and I trusted that it was going to continue to improve along the lines that I saw it having already established itself. I mean, These kids in the Legion of Doom could have been causing all manner of real trouble had they been inclined to. But they had no interest in causing real trouble. They wanted to stop real trouble. But now, all of a sudden, I see other things going on in this environment that we have all been trying to build together, this new world, that make me wonder very much about whether or not we can trust each other. And if we can't, in an environment that is essentially permanently extra-legal, in my opinion, I still believe that. What are we going to do about it? And there are a bunch of things that I could point to, and I hope that if we have a discussion, we can come up with some other ones. But I have one of the older, continuously operating email addresses in cyberspace, I would say at this point. Barlow@EFF.org has been around since 1990. It's my only email address. I get on some weeks I get as many as 30,000 spams. I have a reasonably good spam filter, and still 90% of what finds its way past that into my inbox is spam. Email, which is a very important part of my life, has become functionally useless to me because there is so much crap that I can't see the important stuff in there. I mean, I can't scan that amount of text fast enough to find the things that I need to see because they're buried in other messages that look like they've gotten pretty good at making their messages look like they might be from somebody I know and actually be something that I'm interested in. And I'm not interested in any of that stuff that you think I'm interested in. Forget about that. Now, why have we not done something about this? Now, why has the natural sort of countervailing cybernetics of social ethics been sufficient to stop this disease, which I think is killing the internet? It's one of the number of things that's killing the internet. And why have those of us that have the skills to start addressing the problem technically and have the moral authority to try to address the problem socially, why are we not doing anything about this? Because it doesn't look to me like we are. We have fallen into a kind of attitude that looks like trust, but is actually paralysis and laziness. And most of this stuff is being done by people who are sufficiently like ourselves. And we have our focus on people who seem culturally very different, who work for large federal agencies, that kind of thing. That we're not being the kinds of cops that we need to be. We're not doing anything about another breach, significant breach of trust, which is virus production. Now, I have a Mac, so this is a blight that I don't have to experience. But most of the people I know that live in the semi-illuminated world of Windows. Now, I know all of you are probably Linux leanies and you have your own problems, but who needs viruses when you're trying to do a Debian install? But the people I know that have Windows machines, live in a continuous hell of, there are a lot of reasons why they live in a continuous hell. There are also the people who make them use those machines. Never mind that. I don't see us doing very much about this, and these things are coming from our community. to a large extent. You know, I mean, you can make a case, and I've made it, and I believe it, that a virus is a form of expression and is legally protected. But it's not morally protected. And I don't think that it's protected, you know, if I see you writing a virus that you're going to put out there as a kind of experimental piece to be picked up by some, you know, jerk off that wouldn't know how to write a virus that is, you know, nihilistic enough to release one, which is what usually happens in a nice sort of symbiosis. You know, I would do something about it if I were you. But I don't think you are. I don't see much evidence. And as a matter of fact, I suspect that there are some people in this room that are writing these things. Now, why the fuck are you doing that? I don't trust you, if you are. But I don't know who you are, so I can't figure out who to trust and who not to trust in this room. There are a number of these things. I mean, there's identity theft, and the use of hacking skills for genuinely bad purposes. Bad purposes. Okay. Now, back when I was dealing with the Legion of Doom, as I said earlier, that if somebody used hacking skills to penetrate a system for larceny purposes, or for the purpose of doing vandalism to that system, harming the system, they didn't need to worry about the Secret Service, anything like as much as they needed to worry about the other members of the Legion of Doom, who would come after them, you know, and make their lives very difficult. But now we see that there are a lot of people who have these kinds of skills who are putting themselves in the employ of large organized crime groups, mostly from Eastern Europe, but also from Asia. And they are getting extremely good at phishing and spoofing and identity theft. I mean, in spite of the fact that my American Express card doesn't work about half the time just because every time I move they think that, you know, it's been stolen. I mean, I fly constantly, and you'd think an American Express would have an algorithm in there someplace that was smart enough to know that, you know, we have jet aircraft and I use them. But despite all their, you know, overly effective security devices against me, about a month and a half ago, some fella turned up in Bangkok, Thailand, with my American Express number and apparently something exactly like the mag strip on the back of my Platinum card and my PIN code, and went to, 30 different ATMs over the course of the afternoon, and withdrew the equivalent of about $18,000 in Thai baht. And I'm still getting that sorted out. Now, in order for that to happen, somebody was using some extremely sophisticated skills in terms of how this was not just social engineering. This was somebody operating at a great distance from me. This wasn't somebody who done some shoulder surfing as I was standing at an ATM. They had hacked into the system. They'd used some really sophisticated skills. Ethics is not sufficient to deter this kind of activity. And I don't see us doing very much about that either. I mean, if there's going to be a force that countervails against this kind of behavior, it's going to consist of people like the ones in this room. What are you doing about it? I'd say next to nothing. Because your sympathies kind of lie with them. Because they're against the grown-ups. They're against the state. They're against the things like American Express. Well, they're against you too. Certainly against me when they go out and do that. That's how you get your identity stolen, and it takes a while to get it back. And in the middle, you find yourself in a condition exactly like the one that I was afraid that the little miscreants in the Legion of Doom were going to leave me in, where you essentially don't have credit. You can't hardly do anything that involves any money that you can't fold and put in your back pocket. And getting a hold of any of that is sort of tricky. So there are a lot of things about trust at the moment that have to do with the long-term well-being of the internet at this critical point, where without becoming vigilantes, we have to become capable of using the skills that we have to obtain order against those people among us who, for whatever social pathology, cannot be trusted. The ones of our own apparent kind who are not worthy of our trust. We have to find them, and we have to save the internet. Because we're doing something really, really important here, and I don't have to tell you what it is. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have the same sense of holy mission that I do. I mean, we are building something that could convey to every successive generation the right to know. The right to know. Not just freedom of speech, but freedom to know what you want to know. Without regard to where you are in the world, what your social caste is, what your status is, without any of that. Within a reasonably short period of time, if we deal with a number of issues related to copyright, that's another one. And we don't allow the net to be destroyed by the folks who are trying to take it down with some of the diseases that I just mentioned. Something very wonderful will happen here. And if we want to be good ancestors, and I hope you all do, I mean, most of you haven't thought about being ancestors yet, but you will, probably. And you are, even if you're not being in a sort of reproductive state. Because the people of the future will owe much to you, what you do in this generation, what you do in the next 20 years. So I ask you on behalf of them to figure out who is worthy of your trust within your own community and who is not. And see if we can't do something about dealing with those that obviously are not. Because we have some serious problems we're confronting, and they will get worse. Now then, oh my God. Time flies when you're having fun. We've got about 5 minutes. Or 10. The fellow who preceded me took quite a bit more time than I was expecting. So I figure I can be equally lax since he's part of the organization. Does anybody want to say anything about what I just said?
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
I do. Hi, John.
Hi. Nice to see you.
I'm not sure how familiar you are. Is there a mic? I'm not sure how familiar you are with European hacker culture.
That mic is very back.
In the very back, okay.
Oh, that makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Hello? I'm not sure how familiar you are with European culture, but I hosted in 1989 the Galactic Hacker Party, / the International Conference on the Alternative Use of Technology in Amsterdam, as we call it, for fundraising.
I assume you all know what
most people would.
Profoundly ethical man.
I'm not sure about that. Anyway, part of that was a debate between Val Holland and Pengo, which dealt very much with the events that Clifford Stoll was dealing with from the other side. And I think because of that, as a blessing in disguise, this community has gotten very early on a strong sense of having to deal with the evil inside and having to talk to people. And I find the big difference between this community and, say, the community that goes to American hacker conferences is the fact that there is active talking to people that are going the wrong way. There is active how shall I say, mentoring of kids. There is a lot of stuff that you're talking about is actually happening here, in contrast to some of the things that I've at least seen in the States.
Well, I know anytime
So I'm just suggesting that even though the phenomenon exists in any hacker community, I think in part you're probably barking up the wrong tree.
I figured I was. But I was sort of hoping that, I was sort of hoping that some of you would go out and bark up the right tree. That's all. No, I mean, I don't get the impression that this is a room filled with, malignant people. And I remember, when I first heard about you, I was a little spooked at you, and then I saw a bumper sticker that Hacktick had put out that said, "I heart your computer." I thought, these people can't be all bad. Anybody else? Andy.
My idea was, when you said you have a mission, of course this was a provocation to us, thank you, that what we need in the end is uncertainty. I think this is the only answer to security, surveillance and all this, and I don't agree with Tim that we need more trust. I mean, we have to trust the people we know and we work with. There doesn't have to be a kind of national trust or something like this, or society trust. This is nonsense. We need uncertainty.
Oh, I agree. I mean, uncertainty is the very best tool for dealing with, large structured institutions. They hate it. I mean, you can get a large organization to behave if you stand over it with the monkey wrench, sort of shaking in your fingers, and make them uncertain about when you might drop it. You don't ever have to drop it at all. You just have to make them uncertain about when you might.
So I just have a question about trustworthiness of organizations. I mean, EFF as well as CCC was created as calling themselves NGOs, non-governmental organizations. I mean, there was some years ago in that time this contest for PGOs, for post-governmental organizations, which was maybe a joke, maybe an evolutionary idea. What do we do in the time where governments fail, or they just, they stop to exist in some areas? And so, where we have reached that point, pretty sure, that governments start to disappear in maybe areas that are important, that there are institutions. My question to you would be, what do you think are the trustworthiness institutions we need in society? Next to the question, I do very much appreciate what kind of level of trust do we need among each other?
Well, I think, the answer to the first part of the question depends heavily on the answer to the second part of the question. Because it's only through a matrix of trust for one another, individually and socially and within our own community, that these things can work well. I mean, I'm part of. Does anybody here know about Burning Man? I mean, is that something people know about here? How many people have actually been to Burning Man? Okay. Well, it's an interesting thing because what it's trying to do is to take some of what we've learned from the internet, self-organizing systems that we've learned from the internet, and apply them to the physical world. And it's starting to work in terms of being post-governmental approaches, and sometimes quite effectively. I mean, the first people on the scene in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina were a bunch of people who left Burning Man and went down there and set up soup kitchens and hospitals when the federal government was incapable of doing so. Ran blockades, There was a great picture in the New York Times of a soldier getting food from obviously an anarchist, if ever there was one, because the soldiers' food supplies didn't work and the anarchists did. When government fails, turn to anarchy. The problem is that the other governmental organization is the multinational corporation, and increasingly what's running the world in a way that is no longer countervailed by governmental resistance is large corporations that are effectively unregulated and unregulatable because there's nothing there to regulate them. And so, in some respects, I suppose they're actually doing some good, but I think we are now to the point. You and I and others like us used to talk idealistically back in the late '80s and early '90s about the future in which government as we knew it would become unnecessary. And I think we're a ways from getting there, and the road to that point is going to be filled with deep potholes and mistakes. And I'm starting to get a lot more realistic about how hard this is going to be. It's not something I'm going to see in my lifetime, which I once thought I would, to any great extent. But I do recommend, going out and doing test drives of various self-organizing systems like Burning Man, where you still, you manage to get 40 or 50,000 people out in a totally uninhabitable place for a week or 10 days, most of them high on psychedelic drugs, and, they treat one another with great civility and order. Astonishingly little bad takes place out there. It just doesn't happen for a great length of time. So, but we need to experiment with those things and start working them into problems that need to get solved. In any event, you guys have got to go. I am very grateful for your indulgence here this morning. I am very honored to be here finally after all these years, and my prayers for the future lie very much in the hands of people like you.
Thank you very much, Pritlove, and thank you very much especially to John Perry Barlow.